All right, so we are going to go ahead and continue on in Unit 2, going over how to find linear equations. So once we have completed the notes for this section, you'll be able to do this assignment on Newton as well as the Finding Linear Equations worksheet. Okay, so you have two assignments coming up after these notes. So first, we need to know what the slope-intercept form of a line is because this is the form that we see most often, and it looks something like y equals mx plus b. So a lot of us have seen this before, hopefully, and we know that m represents our slope, right, which we talked about how to find in the last video, and b is our y-intercept, which remember we write as a point 0, comma b, right, because it represents a point on the graph. So this is kind of our best case scenario. If they happen to give you the slope and they happen to give you the y-intercept, then to state the equation of the line, you just plug that in for m and b, and you have y equals mx plus b, and that's your line. So yay, okay, but that's the easy case when they give you exactly the two things that you need. Any other time when they aren't giving you the slope and specifically the y-intercept, we use what's called the point slope formula. Okay, and the point slope formula looks like this: y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. Okay, so again, m is still our slope, and we're using a point that's on the line, x1, y1. Okay, so still we're given the slope, or we find the slope somehow, so that doesn't change. But the difference in these two things is if you're specifically given the y-intercept, you can just plug it in for b. If the point is anything other than the y-intercept, then we're going to use this formula, and you're going to plug that point in for x1, y1. Okay, and we're going to solve it for y so that it looks like this, so we can get our answer. Okay, so these are two very important forms to be aware of. These will not be given to you on a test, but you will need to know them. If I say write your solution in slope-intercept form, okay, you need to know that means y equals mx plus b. Or if you're given a point that is not the y-intercept and I say find the equation of the line given a slope and a point or something like that, you need to know that you need to use this point slope formula and what that point slope formula is. So if you are starring things or highlighting things or making a note card as you go through these sections, these are two that you want to make sure to note. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and look at some examples. So the first example I'm given is a slope of -3 and the point 1, -2. So notice this is not the y-intercept, right? So if it's not the y-intercept, I can't just plug that in, right? I'm going to have to use this point slope formula. So my point slope formula says that we're going to do y minus y1, and that's going to be equal to our slope times x minus x1. Okay, so anytime you need to use this formula, I encourage you to write it because it will help you remember it. Okay, so this is our slope and this is our x1, y1. So I'm going to go ahead and just plug in our numbers. So we have y minus the y1 value that was given, which is a -2. That's equal to our slope, which was given, -3, times x minus the x, which was given, which is 1. Okay, so once we get everything plugged in, now all we have to do is simplify and solve for y. So my double negatives here become positive, and on this side, I'm going to go ahead and distribute my -3. So I have -3x plus 3 when I distribute, and now I just need to move that 2 to the other side by subtracting. So I end up with y is equal to -3x plus 1. So this is the slope-intercept form of the line that has a slope of -3 and goes through the point 1, -2. Okay, let's look at another one. Same idea, they're giving us the slope and they're giving us a point. So this is our x1, y1. Because it's not specifically the y-intercept, and we would know if it's the y-intercept because our x value would be a 0. Okay, so here because our x value is not a 0, we can't just plug it into the easy formula. We have to use the point slope formula. So again, we're going to write it. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. Every time you write it and say it, you learn it. So do that, okay? And we're going to plug in what we have. So y minus the y value they gave us, which is 5, is equal to our slope of 4 times x minus the x value that they gave us, which was 2. Again, I'm going to distribute my 4. So y minus 5 equals 4x minus 8. And then I'm just going to move that 5 to the other side by adding. So that I get y all by itself. So y equals 4x minus 3. And that is the slope-intercept form of the line that has slope 4 and goes through the point 2, 3. Okay? All right, so let's look at a couple. Same idea, but this time the slope is not given on these two examples. So if the slope is not given, obviously that's really important because what we need is the slope and a point to be able to use this formula. So we have 2 points, so we can actually use whichever point we want for our point that we're going to plug into the formula, but we need to find our slope first. So we're going to use our slope formula. Okay, again, remember this is one that we needed to have memorized. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so this is going to be my x1, y1. This is going to be my x2, y2. So I'm going to go ahead and plug those in and figure out what my slope is. Then I'll be able to use that slope and one of the points to plug into this formula. Okay, so plugging in our values, we have our second y, which in this case is negative 10, minus our first y, which was a negative 4, all over our second x, which in this case is a 7, minus our first x, which in this case is a 4. Okay, so we simplify a little bit. My double negatives become positive, so that leaves me with a negative 6 over 3, right? And then that simplifies, so that tells me that my slope is negative 2. Okay, so now that I have my slope, remember, in order to use this formula, I need to know the slope and I need a point. So this is my slope, and I actually have 2 points to choose from, and I'm going to choose this first one. Just because it's smaller numbers. I usually try to pick the ones with smaller numbers or the ones that don't have negatives or anything that makes my life easier, right? So I'm going to use this slope and I'm going to use the point 4, negative 4, and I'm going to plug them into our formula. Y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1. Okay, so now that I have those, plugging them in, y minus the y that I chose, which was negative 4, is equal to the slope that we just figured out, negative 2, times x minus the x that I chose, which was 4. Okay, my double negatives become positive, so I have y plus 4 is equal to, I'm going to distribute this negative 2 in, negative 2x plus 8. And then to get y by itself, I just need to move this 4 to the other side by subtracting. So I end up with y is equal to negative 2x plus 4. And that's the equation of the line going through these 2 points. Okay, so if the slope is given, great. If the slope is not given, then use the information they give you, in this case the 2 points, to find the slope, and then we work it the exact same way. Okay, let me look at one more example, and then I will have y'all try some. Okay, so on this one, same idea, we don't know the slope, so we're going to go ahead and calculate the slope first. The slope says to do my second y minus my first y and divide that by my second x minus my first x. So again, this is definitely a formula that you're going to need to know. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and plug it in. My second y value here is negative 10 minus my first y value, which is a negative 3. And we're dividing that by my second x value, which here is a 4, minus my first x value, which here is a 4. And notice, when I simplify, I have double negatives on top, so that becomes positive. So I'm left with negative 7 over 0. Now remember what happens when our 0 is underneath the fraction, right? Then that means the equation or the fraction here is undefined. Okay? So if it's undefined, what happens when our slope is undefined? Y'all remember? Undefined. The only time that we get an undefined slope is when we have a certain kind of line. Remember, a 0 slope is a horizontal line. An undefined slope is a vertical line, right? So this has to be a vertical line. Now, vertical lines, vertical lines look something like this, right? they go through x values because they're going through the x-axis. So all I have to identify is what is the x value that this line is going through. Well, if you look at your points, right, it will show you that the x value they have in common is 4. So because I know that this has to be a vertical line, it has to be the line x equals 4. So in this case, I didn't even need the point slope formula, right? I didn't need this formula up here because I knew that as soon as I saw an undefined slope, it had to be a vertical line. A vertical line goes through an x value, and the x value that these 2 points share is 4. So it has to be the line x equals 4. Okay. All right. So on the next page, there are 3 for y'all to try. So go ahead and pause the recording, the video, try those, and then whenever you're ready to check yourself, go ahead and play it again, and you can see the worked out answers. Okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go over them. On the first one, they give us the slope and they give us a point. So we're just plugging in -4 for our m and plugging in -1 and -6 for our x1, y1. Okay. Once we simplify, we should end up with y equals -4x plus 25. Okay. If you need more time to look through this, go ahead and pause the video and work it out at your own pace. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the second one. On the second one, we're not given a slope, right? We have to calculate the slope ourselves. So when we calculate the slope, we realize that the slope is a 0. Now from here, there's 2 ways to solve it. If you notice that it's a 0 slope, and you know that the only time that we get a 0 slope is when we have a horizontal line, and a horizontal line goes through a y value, you could just look up here and see what the y value is. The y value here is -2. So this has to be the line y equals -2. Now, if you didn't notice that, you can always take that slope and one of these 2 points, in this case I chose the first point, and plug it into your formula. And notice when you plug in a 0 for your slope, when you multiply it on this side, 0 times anything is just 0. And so when we move the 2 over, we get a -2. Okay. So whether you notice the shortcut of this being a horizontal line right away, or if you plug the 0 in and worked it out, either way you should end up with y equals -2 as your equation of this line. Okay. All right, now let's look at number 3, our last one. Number 3, again, this one, the slope was not given. So we take our 2 points, we calculate our slope, which when we simplify, we should get a slope of +1. Okay, so we're going to take that slope of +1 and whichever point you chose. Okay, I chose the first one because it has smaller numbers, and plug it into our y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1 formula. And when we simplify, we should end up with y equals x minus 1 as our equation of this line. Okay. Again, if you need more time to double check yourself, feel free to pause the video at any time. That is the end of this section, find linear equations. So you should now be able to do that Knewton assignment, find linear equations, as well as the worksheet finding linear equations. So two homework assignments now will be due. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know.